Okay, so we have this, we're in Golden Doves, class 31, introduction, page Roman numeral 27, bottom of the page. We have the sentence of Borges that some holy books, like the Sefer Yetzirah, are not meant to be understood, they're meant to be interpreted. So there's two, let's say, potential ways of approaching a text. One way of approaching a text is that the words are kind of there you have to uncover the words and get to the real meaning or the real mind of the author. But you can never do that, of course, in Sefer Yetzirah, and as Jada is going to say, in any books. So all you can do is, you don't uncover the words, but rather the words generate meaning. You'll never reach the intent of the author, right? So that's where we're up now. As will be seen, this applies to all texts, right, at the semantic level. So semantic level means you're reading the book, not because you want to discover the true emet of the author, but rather you want to interpret the words, where words are treated as signifiers, right? Because the words signify something outside of themselves, right? So that's interpretation. In contradistinction to the semiotic level, where words are treated as signified, or you can look at the words as somehow they're covering something, and the word's not really perfect, but if I can kind of remove the word and I see something behind the word, let's say the word apple, I'll see the true apple.
Oh, uncovering the mind, like uncovering the mind of the author type of idea.
Yes, exactly.
I understand. Okay. Accordingly, meaning is not given, it is not present, rather it is the product of reading.
So when you read the text at the semantic level, as Jeda puts it, or as Borges puts it, that you want to interpret the meaning of the text rather than understand the text, the meaning is never present. The meaning is only there when there's an interaction between the reader and the text, then the meaning is generated. Right? Because it's not like in the Greek world where there is this abstract Platonic ideal truth, and the words are just there to kind of like convey the ideal truth, and they're kind of imperfect at conveying that truth, but they're there. So that's not the way we view it. We don't believe there's an ideal truth. We believe there's a textual truth that comes from the interpretation of the text.
Okay. One of the functions of Darasha is to negate the inside-outside opposition, the one we just said, inner meaning and the outer meaning.
Right.
In Western tradition, some elements of the text are to be considered essential and intrinsic, whereas others are circumstantial and only pertain to the paragon ornamentation, accessory of the text.
Right. So that means, like, for example, you have a picture, you have a painting, and then you have like the frame of the painting. So you say the frame of the painting is completely irrelevant to the meaning of the painting. So similarly, they say that in a text, there are words in the text that are completely irrelevant to the message that the text is meaning to convey, and therefore you ignore those words. This, of course, is in tremendous, stark opposition to rabbinic thinking, where you have a vav there and you say, why do you have the vav there? Or you have the word et. Why do you have the word et there? In this type of thinking, the word et is irrelevant. In rabbinic thinking, no, et lirabot et achicha hagadol or et achotecha hagedola, right?
Yes. Concerning the analytic aesthetic judgment, Immanuel Kant describes Paragon as what is only an adjunct.
An adjunct, right? It's an adjunct. It's not the ikar, it's the tafel. So these words are, right. So sometimes you have beautiful words meant to ornament the text. You use beautiful flowery language, and that beautiful flowery language is really irrelevant. It's just there to give the text extra beauty, but you don't have to take it too seriously. Because the beautiful flowery language has to do with the outer level of the text. Well, what's important is the inside of the text, which is the mind of the author or the Platonic ideal. So you have a woman, so she's beautiful, so she has so she has outer beauty. And then there's the inner beauty of the woman. So you say, oh, the outer beauty is irrelevant. It's just what's outside. So in Torah, no, we believe that the woman should be beautiful. Sarah was beautiful. Rivka was beautiful, right? Helen and I were beautiful. So this idea that there's a dichotomy between inner and outer, and the outer is an adjunct, and therefore you ignore it, or it's not the ikar. You have to look at only the ikar. It's not. It's not correct. It's not. At least that's not the. I'm sorry. It's not the rabbinic Jewish approach to viewing things.
But then just to play devil's advocate for a second, then we say sheker achen vehebel hayofi.
It's true.
And there are golden doves being covered by silver dots.
It's true. It's true. And yet it's important. Meaning, the hen and the yofi, they're ephemeral. They disappear. Isha yalat Adonai titalal. What is titalal? Titalal le'atid lavo. Because the midot tovot, the reason we remember Sarah is not because she was beautiful. We remember her because she had midot tovot. Isha yalat Adonai titalal, right?
Mm-hmm.
We remember her because of that, and we praise her because of that. But nevertheless, the beauty was important. She was beautiful, and the Torah mentions it several times. And we've got, now don't tell me they mentioned it because of the story of Paragon and Avimelech, because they also mentioned it with Rahel, that she was beautiful. And Yaakov and Avinu was, in love with her. I mean, in a good way, I'm saying, not, chas v'sham. So the point is, you're right. It's ephemeral. Eventually, Rahel became an old lady, and like old people, eventually you die. And that's why, in that sense, it's sheker. But it's important.
Mihilab, I need you to pause the recording for a moment. Something is burning.
No problem.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at it.
Okay, let's continue. Right. So in Western tradition, second sentence of the last paragraph.
Right. In Western, we were going to get into what Emmanuel Kant says. In West, concerning the analytical aesthetic judgment.
We read that already. Yes, you're right.
Concerning the analytic aesthetic judgment, Emmanuel Kant describes Paragon as what is only as an adjunct. Right. It is what enables one to frame an art object and to distinguish between the inside, outside, intrinsic, extrinsic, essential, circumstantial, etc. Derrida explains it as follows. Every analytic...
Okay, essential, circumstantial. So Sarai Menu was beautiful. So that was just circumstantial. It wasn't her essence, right? Or the Tamir Chacham looks very handsome and is well dressed and is impeccable in his appearance. Oh, that's just circumstantial. Well, is it? I mean, is it circumstantial, or isn't it part of the complete? We take a more holistic approach, and that's a complete package, and that's the package is part of the substance, right?
Mm-hmm. Every analytic of aesthetic judgment presupposes that we can rigorously distinguish between the intrinsic and the extrinsic.
Right. So when we look at something beautiful, right? So we always believe that, as a matter of fact, we can distinguish between that which is the essence, the mahus, and that which is the outside, the ma'atafa. I'm sure there's something in cooking and thinking about the ma'atafa or the otefet. Yes.
Aesthetic judgment must concern intrinsic beauty and not the around and out. It is therefore necessary to know this is the fundamental presupposition, foundation, how to define the intrinsic, the frame, and what to exclude as frame and beyond the frame.
Yeah, I want to read that paragraph of Derrida again. Every analytic of aesthetic judgment, this is beautiful. That's an aesthetic judgment, right? Presupposes that we can rigorously distinguish between the intrinsic and the extrinsic. In order to say this is beautiful, that means in order to be able to say that, you need to be able to distinguish between the ma'atafa and the mahut.
Okay, so to play again devil's advocate, Rabbi Meir, egoz masa.
I'm sorry?
Rabbi Meir, egoz masa tocho achal kilipato zarak.
Right.
Intrinsic, extrinsic.
Yes and no. We're talking there about ezu hacham halomed mikol adam. The problem there is not extrinsic, intrinsic. The problem there is that his teacher was Elisha Acher. And Elisha Acher, unfortunately, had some ideas that were foreign to Judaism, that were verging on minut. And the lesson we learn from the Meir is Ezu hacham halomed mikol adam, that he can even learn from Elisha Acher. And yes, it was parts that were like the shell of the egoz. He knew to get rid of those parts. He knew how to get rid of those parts and still derive benefits. So I can listen to Stephen Hawkins, and he had some notions that were anti-God. I can still learn from Stephen Hawkins. It's very hard for me to listen to a person who I can't learn from, unless he's from the Biden voter. But okay, that's a different story. I'm sorry. Go on.
Okay. Like the you want to continue reading?
Sorry. So we're going. Aesthetic judgment must concern intrinsic beauty. So, and not the other, and not the around and about. Right. So if you want to say something is beautiful, what you should say is that the mahut is beautiful and not the ma'atafa is beautiful. Because if the ma'atafa is beautiful and the mahut is not beautiful, that's not beautiful. So aesthetic judgment requires that you can say, don't be fooled by the ma'atafa, but you should be able to look inside. And only if you can look inside and see the mahut, and the mahut is beautiful, then you can say, oh, it's beautiful. But if you're going to be fooled by the ma'atafa and say this is beautiful, but you can't see the intrinsic, then you're making an incorrect statement. It's a very, by the way, Derrida, as Jordan Peterson points out, is a very hard reader to point. And these post-structuralists, even though it ends up that they had a Marxist agenda, they were brilliant people. Nobody can take that away from them. They were brilliant writers, and their hard drive worked at an incredible level. So when you read them, you have to read it several times to understand what they're saying. And this is an example of the egoz masa. Kelipato achal ve'otocho achal. This is a good example. Jacques Derrida. I'm not interested in his Marxist agenda, but there are things here that are intelligent. It is therefore necessary to know this is the fundamental presupposition, the foundation, how to define the intrinsic. So how do you define the intrinsic aspect of something? And the answer is look at the yesod hayesodot of that thing. When you look at the yesod hayesodot of that thing, that will identify what's the intrinsic, the framed. And then once you know what the intrinsic is, you know what the outside is, what the frame is. And what to exclude as frame and beyond the frame. And then there's this stuff, for example, I have a painting on my wall, so it has a frame. But then there's a wall. The wall is outside the frame. There's also that. So you need to see the intrinsic, the frame, the paragon, and the outside of the frame. Very amok. So that's Derrida explaining the Western idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic. It doesn't mean he agreed with that idea, but he was bringing these Western structures that he eventually disagrees with. But that's that. Okay, but it was a great explanation.
Like the supplement, the paragon inscribes something exterior to the specific field, but whose transcendent exteriority touches, plays with, brushes, rubs, or presses against the limit and intervenes internally only insofar as the inside is missing.
See where that's from. See footnote 96, and then I'll explain it.
Ibid, page 21.
So that's Derrida. So that's also Derrida. Okay. So the paragon, it sets the limit, it inscribes, because you have, let's say, a square frame. So now the painting is square. So you see how the paragon affects the painting? Because it inscribes it, right? And at the same time, also the frame, if it's a well-designed frame, it touches upon the painting, and sometimes maybe if it's done right, it would kind of extend the painting, right? So that's the point here, right? It intervenes only insofar as the inside is missing. So there could be something missing on the inside that the painting kind of, expands upon. The frame kind of expands upon that aspect of the painting. Yeah.
In the analytic of judgment, this frame is what allows us to define the procedure of formality, the opposition of the formal and the material, the pure and the impure, the proper and the improper, the inside and the outside, also Derrida.
Right, so you have the frame. So for example, you go for a job interview. There's certain formalities, right? You don't just go in, hey, what's going on, man? Nice to see you. So there's the exteriority. You go dressed in a certain way, right? That's a formality. And there's a substance. You can be like the most, best British gentleman in the world, and yet they look at the resume and they see that you went to a lousy college and failed all your courses. That's the materiality. So it's like a change of formality, right? There's a tameh and there's a tahor and there's a tameh. There was kasher and there was pasul, right? All right.
The same may apply to literary theory, whereby some elements are classified as extrinsic, circumstantial, etc., and whose sole function is the framing of the text.
Right. So in literary theory, you also have that idea of extrinsic and intrinsic. And by the way, we're not meaning to exclude this, Joy. You asked a very good question about so her beauty is the extrinsic part, and the intrinsic part is her, midot tovot and yirat Hashem. I'm not, to the extent that I didn't say this clearly before, I want to say it clearly now. I'm not meaning to say that there isn't that dichotomy at some level. There is. Al tistakel b'kankan ela b'ma sheyesh bo. So we do have some element of that dichotomy. So I don't mean to exclude that in rabbinic thinking, but our approach is a little different because for us the kankan is also important. The same way an intelligent curator knows how to put the paintings next to each other in the right way and puts the wall at the right shade and the right colors, meaning where he puts the paintings and the sunlight coming in. These are all exterior elements, but they're important because they help define and interpret the painting. So also in literary theory, when they interpret texts, they also have some certain things that they call circumstantial and not necessary, right?
Mm-hmm. In Darasha text, no paragon is tolerated.
But there is the stark dichotomy. Where are we completely different? When it comes to the interpretation of text, there we reject the paragon dichotomy.
Right. More precisely, even the paragon of the text, or calligraphic ornamentation,
right? The
calligraphic ornamentations, tagim, may generate meaning. The outside is thus the inside.
Right. So even the tagim by us are the subject of interpretation and meaning.
Hello?
Continue.
One of the peculiarities of Rabbi Akiva and his school, the most influential movement in the rabbinic period, was the application of Darasha to all elements of the text, including syntactical particles.
Right.
In other words, the tagim.
The syntactical particles are not the tagim. That's a calligraphic ornamentations. Let's see where footnote number. Oh, he says, yeah.
Pesachim 22b in parallel, Sanhedrin 51b. Syntactical particles.
Right. So it brings the pasuk et Adonai Elohecha tira. Rabbi Akiva is doresh the word et. Et lerabot talmidei chachamim. So that's a syntactical particle. It has to do with syntax, right? And yet he's doresh that word. And furthermore, as you said correctly, calligraphic ornamentations, of course, that refers to the tagim, because Rabbi Akiva was also doresh the tagim on the otiyot, which is an incredible approach to the interpretation of text. Go ahead.
Should I continue?
Yep.
By generating meaning from elements devoid of lexical sense, and therefore external or circumstantial, the rabbis were in fact denying any ground for a logic of supplementarity, or of a distinction between inside and outside.
Right. So in the case of text, it is very clear that the Chachamim disagreed with this notion of intrinsic, extrinsic, circumstantial, substantive, right? For the Chachamim, the frame was part of the story. The frame was telling the story. And therefore, when you look at the world, which is the writing of God, it is important to be in awe of the ornamentation and the beauty and to enjoy it. Like I very much enjoy now walking outside. We have beautiful foliage in my area. I love it. And I enjoy God's artistry. And I view it as God's artwork. And you say, oh, but that's tafel. That's just tafel. You should look at the mahut. No, God is doing a beautiful painting and he has this beautiful ornamentation and gorgeous calligraphy. And I just enjoy it. And it's meant to be enjoyed, right? So that's the idea of we reject that initial split. Well, that wasn't the initial split. The initial split was rhetoric, rhetoric knowledge. We reject that, right? And the splits will come afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think let's stop here because I do have to.
Oh, I was going to say that we finish the next paragraph because then it'll be.
Yes, you're right, by the way.
Unlike the book in Western tradition, the scroll of the Hebrews is unbounded and unframed.
That's a great point, by the way. That's a great point. We don't have like this hard cover. So this is the beginning and this is the end. We don't have that frame, right?
Mm-hmm. The Torah may not be written on the verso of the scroll. What is the verso?
Right. Right. So when you write the Sefer Torah, you can't write on the back. Let's say you ran out of space. There's a front and there's a back. So you write on the back. You cannot write on the back. That's a verso.
Okay. Therefore, it can be rolled inwardly towards the recto. Okay,
right, the front.
The verso serving as its boundary.
Right.
Because
so
the book
is always the boundary.
Mm-hmm. Because the book is written on the verso and cannot be rolled in, it requires an outside element, the frame, as does an art object. Every book requires a paragon. Because
if you look at like the pages of this Golden Doves, they're written on both sides, right? And that's why you need a frame outside.
The inward movement of the scroll indicates that the text is thoroughly cross-referential and therefore self-referential.
Right. So because the book, the Torah that is circular and it's always wound on itself, that means that it's a complete unit. It is self-referential. You don't need anything outside the Torah to understand the Torah.
Mm-hmm. It is noteworthy that on the holiday of Simchat Torah, celebrating the completion of the Torah reading, the beginning of the Torah is read immediately after the end.
Yes.
In this fashion, the total circularity of the text is ascertained.
Right.
The rabbinic principle,
And this is in stark opposition to you open a book, you read it, then you finish it, and that's it. It's done. I mean, you can repeat the book, but it's not necessary to go back to the front. By us, it's necessary to go back to the front because it's just a circle, and there is no beginning or end to the circle.
The rabbinic principle, there's neither before nor after to the Torah, and Torah posits the absolute synchronicity of the Torah. Its cross-referentiality may not be limited by chronological consideration.
That's amazing. That's an amazing point. The synchronicity of the Torah, and therefore you can be Doresh, what Avraham Avinu did to a law of Pesach and Masotan Pesach, because he gave Masot to the Malachim, or Lot gave Masot to the Malachim. I'm sorry, no, it wasn't Avraham. You can make all these Darasha, but what are you talking about? The Torah wasn't giving it. Like, well, what are you saying?
Right.
That's because the Torah is a circle, it's cross-referential, and there is no diachronic access within the text. The text exists synchronically. And that's how you make these derashot. What was Yaakov Avinu thinking when he married Leah and then Rachel and that whole thing? Or the machlokah between the sons of Yaakov, Yosef, with Eben Minachai. There was no law. I mean, Eben Minachai was Ben Enoch, but Yosef wanted to be Eben Minachai according to the laws of the Torah.
And Isav Kesed Na'aserin Tamela.
Right.
Right, definitely. It's a good place to stop, I think.
All right, have a good day, and let's try to touch base again later today, maybe if you have some time.